The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, folks, and good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Whitfield Report podcast. I'm your host, Sam Whitfield, broadcasting here live from South Florida. Max and Mortheous are joining me here as always, and we actually have a special guest tonight, Mr. Rob Rosen, who is an investigative journalist and author, and also a media producer in general. His book, Crimes of Omission, Distorted Justice, The Media's War on Truth, is coming out on June 2nd. Very interesting gentleman.
But we're taking pre-sales now, so.
Yes, pre-order. And I actually know all about that, sir, because I myself am an author, so I understand how that game goes. Speaking of, real quick, if you'll allow me, my book, American Inferno, of course, is out now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook edition. And I want to thank everyone who made the month of March a very successful launch month for American Inferno. I really appreciate everyone who purchased my book.
I told you it was going to be the biggest launch ever, Sam. I just knew it.
Great book.
Yes. And I actually find it interesting that we have Mr. Rosen on the show, because our books, mine is fiction, his is nonfiction, but we both deal with media bias as a as a common theme in our books. At least that's how it appears to me. So, Rob, I want to thank you first off for coming on to the program. And how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it.
It's also a common topic on this show, which is great,
Was that media bias?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well, as we mentioned off air, is like Sam here got banned for essentially no reason, like general COVID. Somebody said something or other that they didn't like, kind of deal. In 2022, right?
Yeah. Geez, it's been that long. Yeah. Wow.
And then we existed outside of that ecosystem for a while, trying to figure our own thing out, because that landscape has changed quite a bit for streaming. And we found in the end, like, multi-streaming, and then YouTube has now let us back on, has worked really well to reach whoever would want to see it, but we also like to interview, just interesting people, especially Sam. He's like the best interview I know.
Yeah. So, Mr. Rosen, like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. First off, would you mind giving us a little bit of your background, just in general, how you got started in media? You've had a very illustrious career from what I've read.
All right. Well, thank you. I was one of those kids that just knew I wanted to do it. I grew up in Boston, and I was just obsessed with all things media, and I would watch TV newscasts with a stopwatch and just kind of try to deconstruct it. How long were each of the acts? How long were the commercial breaks? How were these newscasts put together? I used to do it with sitcoms too. And I just knew I wanted to do it. And then I completely went about it the wrong way in the beginning. I graduated from Boston University Journalism School and had a dual degree with film. Great school, but just decided I'm going to go to San Diego. I'm just going to pick a city, which is not the way to do it, especially back then. I'm going to just pick a city and I'm going to head out there. And lo and behold, to my
Trying
shock,
to get into news specifically.
yeah, trying to get into news. There back then, you had three channels, right? There was a CBS, an ABC, and an NBC that had newsrooms, and nothing else. So what I found, if I wanted to stay out there and not come back to Boston with my head between my legs, was to sell cars near the Mexican border. So I did that for a year. And what's that?
Sick. That I don't. It sounds interesting. It's like, hey,
No, it sucked, and I was like,
Yeah.
my dream's never going to come true. I am just pissing it away. So I ended up. I just remember I threw like a Hail Mary. There was this iconoclastic news director at the CBS in San Diego, this guy Jim Holtzman, who I do write about a little bit in the book, and I don't know. One day I just on an old typewriter just wrote him a letter and said, and it was just kind of a Hail Mary and kind of funny. And I just said, my parents paid, I don't know, $20,000 a year to send me to the Boston University Journalism School, and I'm selling Hondas near the Mexican border. Help! And I guess he thought it was entertaining enough, and he brought me in, and that kind of slowly started me on my way. So I was a news writer there. I quickly came up to Los Angeles and was producing at the Disney-owned station at the time, KCAL, and then KCBS, and went into entertainment news and did some work in front of the camera for a show called Celebrity Justice. That was Harvey Levin's show before TMZ.
Wow.
And then did a pivot. Just decided I really wanted to do long form. At that point, I had just done a lot of like crash and burn, which is fun. It's a great... it's just it's a rush working in daily TV and live TV. But I decided I wanted to like do some more crafting. So got into long form stuff, worked on Kitchen Nightmares for a few seasons with Gordon Ramsay, and then got a chance to do my own show. And I did Dead Files, which ran for 15 seasons, and created and ran a show called Reasonable Doubt, which took a look at possible wrongful murder convictions. And
which is really, really, really cool, by the way. Just from my I am a person that advocates that topic as long as I've had a voice to do so. So I think that show is a really cool concept.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I loved doing it, and it put everything together. It was like everything I'd learned from the news, from the investigative reporting, and also how to make a compelling TV show kind of all came together in that show. And then did a Dennis Miller special, the history of infomercials for Fox Nation, and then felt compelled to write this book, which was a little bit of a pivot. But after everything that I'd seen, I mean, I love TV, I love journalism, and it makes me sad to see what it's become and how little faith people have in it. And so I wanted to put my 2 cents in.
Yeah, that's actually kind of why I started doing podcasting too. I started podcasting when I was 14. I had listened to Rush Limbaugh as a kid just because I was one of those weird kids that was always like interested in politics. And it's interesting that you bring up Dennis Miller too, because I actually used to call into Dennis Miller's show, radio show, I should say, and I got to know his producer, Christian, who I've had on the show a few times as well. And so that was interesting. And around the time that Joe Rogan, I guess, started to become popular in 2008, that was when I started to kind of jump into podcasting when nobody really knew what it was. And I've just kind of been in this space, ever since.
Last week was the 18-year anniversary of his show. Don't downplay yourself, Sam. He's been at this a long time.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
And then he started writing books a couple of years ago as a passion project, and he's seen a little bit of success with that. But yeah. He's just loved this forever. I went back and I've only been here a couple of years and I didn't even realize that, He's been at it since he was a kid.
Yeah.
So you're a weird kid like me.
Yeah, I guess we kind of go into, I guess, those of us who, are weird kids, and Max included, we all kind of go into media, it seems like, all the kids who are kind of, I wouldn't say outcast, but kind of eccentric tend to go into media, it seems.
Yeah, or they're, or whatever the passion is. But I remember we had a talk radio station in Boston. Well, a couple of them, and I would just like at night listen to it. Like I loved listening to. It was WRKO, which was like a legendary radio station.
See, I'm a masshole. WRKO is like, that's
where did you grow up?
Oh, and I used to listen to.
Where did you grow up in, or where were you in Massachusetts?
I'm on the South Coast, over by like Rhode Island.
Okay, yeah.
Just
my uncle had an egg farm in Cranston.
There you go, not too far from here. I'm like more like close to like Pawtucket and Providence than Boston per se. But that was one we would listen to. And the other big one for me growing up was actually Loveline on, I think it was like 1037 or whatever out of Boston, would carry Loveline every Saturday night.
Was it BCN?
Yeah.
Alternative rock, yeah.
Yeah, they used to host the River Rape. See, because I am similar, but I went towards hanging out with musicians that got me in a lot of trouble because they were too cool for my own good. And so was I. And hanging out with like Boston hardcore bands and getting in fights and stuff,
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
The same passion for art and media, but I choose a weird lot. And
who were the bands?
And I was the weird kid hanging out with the school DJ at dances.
There you go. So wait, who were the bands? I mean, God, I'll date myself, but I remember when I was in college, the Hoodoo Gurus were like a really big local band in Boston. But
I've mentioned it on the show, so it's not the worst thing ever. But I can't even really mention the name of his band, but Seth Putnam, the singer of AXCX, it was a friend of mine. He's passed.
Okay.
He was like intentionally as offensive as possible. That was his whole bit in life. And he was a fun guy to hang out with when you were 15 and get in fights with other hardcore bands and stuff. I look back now in my 40s though, and I'm like, there's me in a fight. There's video of some of them. I was not bright.
Well, you live, you learn.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Usually we were fighting like the skinheads.
Where were you, down at the Rat or something? The Rat Skeleton?
Yeah, up at all the rock clubs down in Southie that played like hardcore, in the 90s. Also big million Guar shows. If that.
I remember friends of mine in college went to a Mentors show, and then they were scared for their lives.
That'll do it, or so I've heard. Yeah, I'm from Colorado, and right around the time I was getting into right around the time I was trying to get into radio, I was still in high school, and that was kind of when Clear Channel started to buy out all of the local radio stations. And
the
even
thing
though
we
I
bonded over right away is I also had this problem where Clear Channel buying everything up took away a potential, because I was interning for a radio station out of Providence, and then that kind of ended when like they didn't need you to play songs or really do anything anymore because Clear Channel sent a signal in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I wanted to go to school initially for broadcast journalism, but then I decided to go into technical writing because broadcast journalism wasn't really that as much of an effective major in like the early 2010s. So that was kind of my path, and I still stuck with podcasting, and here we are. So
It sort of full circled the industry to a degree for radio, where like one, not even three, right? One station owned everything in the country for the longest time until digital inevitably kind of killed it. And that's the thing I've argued for years, is that Clear Channel sort of made the digital shift happen by doing that.
That's an interesting
Killed
thought.
the need for like broadcast radio, and the convenient streaming option was just more convenient.
I can't remember the last time I've listened to a terrestrial radio station.
Yeah, we mention this all the time. We're big fans of it
forever.
growing up, the format, but the medium itself is just dead.
Yeah.
It's a sad thing because, like I said, Sam, me talking about Rush Limbaugh, my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, and he was a very interesting guy, would just sit me down from when I was real little with Rush Limbaugh and the Gordon Liddy radio show, which is an interesting thing for a young boy to have been listening to.
That seems like a lot. I mean, I remember in Boston, there was a guy named Jerry Williams, you may remember, on WRKO, and you could not pin where he was. I would say he was maybe in a way Bill Maher before Bill Maher. And this guy was like, he was the biggest thorn in the side of Michael Dukakis, who was our governor, who ended up being the Democratic candidate for president in '88. And but then sometimes he would be left, sometimes he'd be right. He just kept you on your toes.
Like he got crushed in that election too.
Dukakis 88 to Bush, that was not very close.
Yeah, no, not at all. But anyway, I mean, so you've been in media for a long time. From your perspective, I mean, just kind of piggyback on how what we've been talking about. How do you see how it's changed and evolved? And then what led you to write this book, Crimes of Omission?
It is an interesting twist to go from being full multimedia everything to writing a book, right?
I know.
Yeah.
But in a way, I mean, it was really fun, right? And I mean, I love doing most kinds of TV shows or documentaries, or that kind of work is very collaborative, and that's really fun. But there is something where it's just your work, your research, your writing, and you have an editor who gives you some notes. But for the most part, this is a very solitary kind of endeavor, and that was fun too. I think the summer of 2020 is what made me really think that it was time that something like this needed to be written, because I'm watching cities in America burn, and the coverage, I felt, let me just back up a little bit, doing Reasonable Doubt and taking a look at when the system had failed. The whole anti-police movement was burgeoning during that time. We started the show I think I sold it in 2015, and we started shooting in 2016. So you're at the height of the BLM movement and the anti-police movement. And I just felt journalistically what I was seeing wasn't sound. That even though I didn't have all the information at that time, it just felt like the decks were stacked. Things were being told, pretty much trying to lead viewers to the position of the activists. And so by the time we got to 2020, and I'm watching cities burn, and I'm watching reporters who I think otherwise are really good and quality reporters, standing in front of burning buildings, standing in front of dozens of people throwing projectiles at police officers, standing in front of stores being looted, and assuring us that there's really nothing to see here. Everything is fine.
2 words that rang the most true: mostly peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
Yes, mostly peaceful. So, one of the very first things that
right in their core, right?
Well, so one of the very first things you learn when you go into a newsroom is to be a good writer for TV news. You gather the video that you have that has been shot out in the field, and you write to it. You don't write a script and then look for video, if that makes sense, because it's a video-driven medium. And so you're writing to your pictures. So it was very Orwellian for me to watch people fighting the images that they were broadcasting, saying, Don't believe your eyes. Just listen to me. This you're not really seeing what you're seeing. So something had gone wrong. And for this book, I ended up interviewing dozens of really high profile people and journalism, A lot of them went on the record. I spoke to a lot of law enforcement to really try to get a well-rounded picture. And look, I don't know what the POV of your podcast is. You are on Rumble, so I'm assuming you have a conservative audience. I did not set out to write a conservative book, and in some of the cases, I think the cops were wrong. However, what I
We
did
tend
find,
to fall on different sides of different issues and piss off all kinds of people on occasion.
well, there
Oh,
you
yeah,
go. Then
that's-
you're,
Yeah.
then you're doing it right. But
Hopefully.
but what I did think was that in almost all of these cases, the media got it wrong. They were inflaming instead of informing. They were cherry picking cases to actually to turn into the 48-hour news cycle. They were ignoring cases that did not fit into the agenda of the activists. And so it had slidden all of a sudden, instead of having their North Star being the truth and trying to get to hard truths, all of a sudden the media was really doing the work of the activists. And this is not the role of journalism. And I just felt compelled to write this book. So look, for anybody who's listening or watching and who's thinking of getting it, I'd like to think this reads like a mystery novel. I take the biggest cases, starting with Trayvon Martin, ending with George Floyd, and give you a full picture of what happened. Everything, the good and the bad. It's not trying to fit an agenda. And then take you into the management of some of the biggest newsrooms in the world, in the country, and to try to get firsthand accounts of what went into the decisions, and why these stories were being covered the way they were.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that they like to try and censor too.
Yeah. And this kind of fits in well because we've interviewed at least a couple of veteran police officers who are also authors in the thriller space, but they have experience. And one of the things just from talking to them that I've noticed is a lot of them, and I can't speak for all of them, but a lot of them feel like the media is certainly agenda driven, and that a lot of them already have like a narrative pre-planned before they actually go to interview people. And it, just kind of looking as an audience member, it kind of seems that way to me. But do you think
a big example that we've talked about quite a bit is how you can map out the speech about certain topics from all different reporters on all different news stations exactly beat for beat to each other, word for word?
Yeah, that seems
That's like a meme that a lot of people like. Wow, they're all saying the exact same words and it has a perspective to it, right? It's like it struck people as weird, even if they weren't all that political in some cases.
Yeah.
Mortheous is actually one of them.
Yep. That's about when I started paying attention was 2019, 2020. I'm like, okay, something's not right here. What's going on? And I started digging.
So, what do you think, if I may ask, and I don't know what your perspective is, but why do you think the media is doing this? Do you think it's intentional that they're trying to mislead people just for like views, or do you think they're just doing what they do with good intentions?
It's more subtle than that. I think what happened is, in the first wave of TV news people that came out, I mean, it's not that old of a the first nightly network newscast, I think 61 or 62. So it's not that old. You've had basically two generations.
And you didn't have like national coverage with different casters until like the 70s or 80s when you had
in the 60s. In the 60s, they started coming in, but that first wave were mostly blue collar guys. They were mostly men. They were blue collar guys. Very few of them had college degrees. Walter Cronkite, the granddaddy of them all, did not graduate from college. And so I think that they didn't have to figure out who their audience were. They were the audience. And they
a good chunk of them were also war veterans, which I think matters.
Sure. I mean, look, they were still accused of having a little bit of a bias, and they might have, but they were blue collar guys, not afraid of calling truth to power. They didn't have elitist tastes or elitist lifestyles. And so they were fulfilling a need, and they understood what their audience needed. They lived in those communities with them. If you fast forward to today and you go into a newsroom, I would say, especially in a national network setting or cable news setting, overwhelmingly you're going to find people who come from middle class, upper middle class, or wealthy backgrounds, who went to really good universities, who probably 10 to 1 identify as liberal, at least, and they all have similar lifestyles, right? If they're working out of New York, they're probably in a really cool, if they're younger, they're in a cool little neighborhood in Brooklyn. And
we tend to use the term urbanite because it kind of
blue
nails it.
You could say a blue bubble, right? They go to the co-op, they they buy vinyl records, and they belong to a Pilates class, and they they go shop at Whole Foods, and so there's a mindset, there's a and I think that within those environments, there's a monoculture. There's people think alike, have the same kind of interests. So the book is called Crimes of Omission because, despite what people think, I don't believe that journalists lie to you. They're not, very rarely will they say something that is untrue. But what they will do is simply omit elements of the story or not cover a story at all that is not something that either interests them or is convenient to their worldview. So,
and that's what grinds my gears personally.
Yeah. I constantly refer to that as tactical ignorance because it's exactly what it is most of the time. When they just, because this happens a lot when you confront somebody too in any way, even if they don't know where you're coming from, the fact that they feel they're under attack. This often happens to people that I find that are like living in that kind of bubble. Is they like react like, I don't understand the very basic vocabulary words coming out of your mouth. And even if you define it for me in a very simple manner, I'm going to pretend it's very confusing and just keep believing what I believe to frustrate you into believing it too.
Yeah. And look, I don't know if I can speak to that, but I think that, I've been a part of this monoculture, so I understand it. I think people reinforce beliefs with each other within a social network, right? So let's just say you're in a deep red state and in a very conservative, I don't know, let's say you're working a construction job and everyone's pretty conservative and pretty pro-Trump. Again, not to offend a Rumble audience, but my faithfulness is facts.
We're right to offend media, by the way, so go ahead.
Right.
Okay, so I am faithful to the facts first, and I will say, look, you probably would go on that construction site and you might do a poll, and a lot of people will believe the 2020 election was stolen.
Yeah,
I hate to break it, it wasn't, and so that's a monoculture. The thing is that I think the people these days who are in control of news and control of journalism, outside of some pockets that we all know well, generally are going to have that big blue bubble bias. I don't think it's anything. There's no like conspiracy theory. There's no huge agenda. You get a lot of people together who think alike, have the same backgrounds, have similar interests, travel in the same circles, and then you put them together in a morning meeting, which almost every newsroom in the world has, and it sets the agenda for the day. They're not going to raise their hands and say, hey, you know what? We should do a story. This would be in Trump 1.0. Unemployment for Latinos is at a record low. Maybe we should do that story. It's just not part of their worldview, right? So I think that there's an unspoken culture in these newsrooms. The kind of stories, everyone's ambitious. The kind of stories that you're going to get praised for. The kind of stories that your boss is going to look at you and say, attaboy. And the kind of stories where you pitch it, there's going to be a lot of silence, and you're going to be that person who just doesn't get it.
Not limited to just the liberal side of it. We are constant. Actually, one of the things we're most kind of known for at this point is how critical we are of conservative independent media and, more broadly in conservative media from a conservative side.
Yeah.
Because it's often so full of shit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For the same reason, omission. It's what they don't want you. It's not even what they don't tell you about a subject. It's the subject they don't even want you to talk about. And they've really become adept at moving the news cycle so fast. Like, think about this. If the Epstein thing is the biggest thing in the world, like some of these people are like obsessed with it to a degree I find unhealthy, then why is nobody talking about it because Iran? Because you're supposed to move on, dummy. You're supposed to talk about the new thing. I always call it the thing problem, right? It's like you're supposed to talk about the thing, whether you're for the thing or you're against the thing. If you're not talking about the thing, fuck you.
Well, and just to, I guess I'll redirect back and give an example from the book. Do either of you guys know a guy named Tony Timpa?
Yes, I was actually going to ask you about that because
All right, well,
I
good.
was
I've done a lot of media for this, and I've yet to meet anyone who knew who he was. So you guys
no,
are the first. Good for you.
I was
Oh,
I
yeah.
was actually going to ask you about that in particular. So you actually, I guess this kind of segues. So when I was in college, that was kind of when the Black Lives Matter thing first popped up in like 2014, 2015 when I first
2014 with Ferguson.
and we should be back. So I apologize. Rumble likes to sometimes glitch out, as does YouTube, but we're back now for part 2. Rob, when I believe when we got cut off, you were starting to talk about the statistics of what the actual number of black victims in that poll of liberal versus conservatives actually was, and you said it was only 14.
Yes,
People.
specifically.
Yeah, in the year 2019. Yeah, so the
Unarmed,
Washington Post,
a black civilian shot by
Right.
police is the specific statistic.
well, it doesn't have to be shot, but just killed by police in some format.
There you go.
Right. So, yeah, and then the Washington Post kept a database. It was a complex story, and I hope that people who read the book, and I hope it's done in an entertaining fashion and it reads like a true crime story. But when you read the whole thing, a lot of these cases are different, and you start seeing why certain juries acquitted officers, like in the Freddie Gray case or George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case. These cases were complex and not really presented accurately or with balance. I think also you started seeing, I did a whole chapter on broken windows policing because there was no context given to the incredible gains that the police departments in the United States had made.
I was going to just ask a question regarding that, actually. I was going to say, do you think that the rise of body cams has made things better or worse overall? Because I think it's made things much better for both sides, personally.
I think so.
Even though many people were obviously super opposed to it.
No, I think so. Hey, I'm sorry, the producer in me is speaking up, but before we had like a rolling, like a red recording with a time code, and that's gone from my screen, but we are still rolling, right?
Yeah, we still are on my end. So.
Okay. All right.
No, I understand. Rumble just did like an update to their studio thing, and it's been kind of glitchy.
We call it getting rumbled because there's a new quirk every week.
Yeah, it was good, and then they decided to do an update, and it improved some things, but it also
as all good updates too.
Yeah, it has
something else important.
Okay. I'm only asking because before, when I looked on the screen, I would see like a little red record light and then the total number of people watching, and then that has disappeared. So I just want to
make sure. No, I appreciate that, and I'll have this whole thing stitched together, and I'm sending out the stream link now. So
All good.
But
All good. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. It's the
no,
producer.
I actually
We
appreciate that.
derail into production talk almost every week anyway. So welcome to the show.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We're
So,
nerds.
so in regards to that whole thing with the body cams, and also with the media, one thing I'm curious about, kind of in regards to your experience, do you think that the internet in particular has changed the dynamics of news, or I guess how do you think it's produced?
I mean,
Because
people have, and this is a few subtle ways. Shepard Smith, the Fox anchor, spoke to me quite at length for this book project. And one of the things he told me was that Fox executives became very reactive. They would go on Twitter at the time. They would look at there would be a story, and maybe a few of them would complain, Shepard's being too hard on the president. And then they'd say, maybe you shouldn't be so hard on the president. They were getting instant feedback, and they were doing what executives do best, which is panic. And so that was an issue. I think another issue, secondary, is, in the old school, you weren't supposed to know where reporters stood on certain issues and where they stood politically. But now you just had people letting it all hang out on social media.
When do you think that shift happened? Because everybody kind of acknowledges that happened, right? And it seems to me it's like maybe the late 90s when cable news started to have multiple channels can be one origin point, but really talk radio had this before too. So it's really hard to say where that happened, where instead of having the objective presenting, I mean, obviously we all have a viewpoint, but the objective trying to present reporter turned into hey, this is what I think and you should all know about it.
I mean, I think the line between punditry and reporting is blurred.
Very thin.
A lot of times CNN will go do a story, and they'll do a straight news story. Then they come back to a panel. And panels are relatively cheap. You have 6 people sitting around a desk, yakking it up for 10 minutes. That's an easy way to burn through time. And that becomes very disorienting for a viewer, because where does the factual news reporting start and where does the opinion begin? Most cable news late night shows are all opinion, right? I mean, Sean Hannity is not a journalist, and nor I don't think is he pretending to be one. Rachel Maddow's not a journalist, right? These are people who are there to be pundits, to give opinions, and that's fine. But I think that the line can get very blurry, and because of that, I think it's disorienting for the audience, and they're not really clear where one stops and the other one begins. I think the other issue with the internet is, because media, mainstream news, organizations that have the money and power to have an assignment desk and reporters in Jerusalem, all corners of the world, they're best equipped to be our windows to the world. But because people have lost their trust in them, people are now going to alternative forms of media, which not all, but in many cases are far worse, right? So look, during COVID, the health establishment lost a lot of trust. But that doesn't mean that the person who's got a TikTok channel who says pomegranate juice will cure your knee pain is somebody that you really, want to listen to or take medical advice from, right?
So with us, right, is there's so much. I said this morning for April Fool's Day, right, where it's there's so much misinformation. What even does April Fool's mean? Right. And I said, my strategy for this, I'm just going to believe everything I see all day because it's more fun. Because I know everybody's just lying all the time on every given day anyway. So what significance does April 1st have?
Right.
Well, it's a sad state of affairs, but we're getting there. But that's Jeremy Boring, who was the Ben Shapiro producer, was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and he was saying it's very powerful when someone can prove to you that someone has been lying to you. So a lot of these podcasters make a good case of why maybe mainstream news has not told you the truth about certain things and why they shouldn't be trusted. And so people trust that person because it's a powerful message. The problem is that person oftentimes is 10x worse. So, I think as much as this sounds probably very lofty and idealistic, the polarization that we have will never calm down unless we all live in a shared reality. And right now, with all of these like different sources of information, where you have some people who don't even believe we landed on the moon, it is hard for us to come together when we don't even see the world through the same lens.
And a lot of that is driven by what I call the attention economy. A lot of people call it the attention economy. And that's really important is for a lot of the people trying to get into media in the way they see it now, the people that want to be influencers on up and talk about politics and everything else. These young people that grew up watching YouTube, they understand that getting attention is more important than integrity if you want to get attention.
Yeah,
And that's
which
a
is
problem.
that's
Obviously.
concerning.
Yep.
Or you're also not allowed to call out integrity where you see it if the source is bad. One problem I ran into is that the New York Times did an amazing bit about Pornhub a couple of years ago, exposing quite a bit of what I consider to be pretty awful. And because I'm citing the New York Post, I have friends being like, "Oh, what are you, some kind of lefty woke?" And it's like the good reporting about a subject like as serious as Pornhub's involvement in potential trafficking of children and things, and the need for age verification is good reporting, right? But it turned into people telling me, "Well, I can't even listen because the source is the New York Times," and I don't like that. They're bad.
So it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, because if someone gets their news, let's say from MS Now, and I remember watching the day after the election in 24, I was watching a little bit of MS Now, and Rachel Maddow fighting tears and saying, we're probably going to end up in internment camps. We're probably going to get shut down. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to keep fighting. Now, if that's your reality, of course you're going to go to a No Kings protest and freak out, because, that's your window into the world, right? And
it also makes the other side, it spins it real easy that you sound delusional, you sound over the top. Now, a more charitable read of her, in my opinion, would be to say she's melodramatic, right? Rather than, I don't think she's the doomsayer of all doomsayers. I do think she has a penchant for the dramatic, and she plays that up for the same reason everybody else does, because it gets her attention. But I don't, the other side then turns that into, see this delusional, crazy ranting.
But I think even just setting all that aside for a second, the problem is, and you have the polarization levels where people really by the summer of 2020 were seriously talking about whether we were getting to a place of civil war. When people cannot even agree on who won an election, is climate change an existential threat? Is the border open or closed? Is the president of the United States able to make decisions? Is he fully functional? There are a million things like this where people are seeing the world through such a different lens that some people can go out and go to a MAGA rally and be moved to almost tears watching Trump speak to them. And then you can have some people who go out to a No Kings rally and feel as though our way of life is at risk. Is it really that much of a difference of values, or is it a difference in the window into the world? They're just seeing the world differently because they're watching different channels.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that's weird, and I don't know if you're not comfortable commenting on this. We don't have to dive into it too much, but it's been weird for us all, in particular me, ever since Charlie Kirk died, because I didn't know Charlie Kirk well, but I did interact with him online, and I did talk with him on Skype a few times back in the early days. I knew him casually,
And we did a
well
show that
enough.
night, as we always do, and it was pretty a raw emotional reaction on our part. It
Yeah.
affected all of us very deeply.
So the thing that's the kind of disturbing to me is like even within conservative media, I would say you even have like a lot of these like fracturing views where even Charlie Kirk's assassination, something that I would hope would bring the entire nation together to say, hey, this guy's, murder, like his opinions or not, is a bad thing. It's become just like another, media circus and a clickbait farm. And, even like taking my personal connection out of it, like it's kind of been exhausting,
It's a
just to,
mean-spirited punchline.
yeah, it's become really disgusting, honestly, just
So
from
would you
my,
say that, all right, so we know, I mean, let's just call it out, right? So someone like Candace Owen has just completely, and I'm just saying this now journalistically, she's a pundit. She's not a journalist in the least,
yeah,
but she has
no,
used this to create all sorts of like really wild out there conspiracy theories. And I even did a little bit of digging into some of her claims, and they're easily refuted.
oh
But
yeah,
but that hasn't stopped that kind of ugliness, and that speaks to what I was saying, right? When people lose faith in mainstream, they go to other sources, but sometimes those sources, I think you're better off informed watching NBC News 25,000x than listening to Candace Owen, right? I mean,
yeah,
so
yeah,
whatever
We've
bias
agreed.
it is, NBC.
There's very few things I would say that wouldn't be better to, like, I listen to music. That's better. I'm
Of
more
course.
informed about the world around me by listening to random music I like on Spotify than by listening to Candace Owens.
Okay, so we're on the same page there. So, but that is,
Because we
but
think,
okay,
I mean,
so
we've
let's,
said a lot about how crazy we
but
think
let's
she is.
take out the Kimmel and that part. I thought that news reports were generally okay. I did think that some of the New York Times, if I remember right, I think the New York Times had some questionable headlines about Kirk's death where they were sort of highlighting controversial things he may have said, which of
yeah,
course, when an Ayatollah is killed, then it's just like a leader of Iran has been gunned down, right? There's no like, yeah, this is the guy who wanted to behead gays and, make women stay
I've
inside.
decided if I ever do die, I hope they dig up all the out of context worst stuff I said, because it would at least be funny.
There you go. There you go. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think overall, well, let's put it this way. Could the news coverage in the mainstream press of Charlie Kirk's assassination have been better? Yes. Were there crimes of omission? Sure, just like with everything else. But were you better informed if you watched that versus listening to corners of the podcast sphere? Yeah, you still were better off, right? So, I think that I hold, just if I could tie this knot, I just think that I hold journalists to a higher standard, right? Anyone can do a podcast. No offense to anyone here, right? Anybody can just start up a podcast. To be able to have the honor of reporting news on a CNN or an NBC, and to be hired and to have all of those resources and all the desks all over the world and a huge staff, you have an obligation that is much higher than someone who just fires up a microphone and just starts doing a podcast. And so I don't really take the Candace Owens of the world that seriously. I think the bigger issue is, what can mainstream news do to regain the trust of more of the nation so that we can all live in the same world and be standing in the same reality and see the world the same way, because it's splintering more and more.
My main answer to this for several years now, to be honest with you, has been that they need to call out violent rhetoric from whoever's calling it, whoever's saying it. And I believe that, like, when it crosses the line into stuff that's not legal, it needs to be dealt with and legally if possible, because I think that that's the thing, is a lot of people are making casual threats and riling themselves up, and I'm in, Antifa gang, I'm in Proud Boy gang, and all this stuff. And it's very childish from where I sit as like a dad that's trying to get by in this world rather than, somebody wrapped up in internet fantasies. But I come across the stuff and it's like, they're self-radicalizing themselves from these podcasts, trickle down into like lower tier guys who will say the worst
Right.
thing.
So where
And
is
then
this? Because I don't mean to sound naive. I mean, like, I don't even have Rumble. This is the first time I've done anything with Rumble, and I don't see these. I don't see these. Is this a Rumble thing? Is this an 8chan thing? Like, where are these people?
This is a Twitter thing. This is
Really?
X.
I guess my
Oh,
feed
yeah.
just. I mean, look,
well-
at some point, I do agree with Elon Musk on this, and now this is just to be clear, since I'm writing about
I could
journalism.
point to one in particular, very, very well known, Hassan Piker.
Oh yeah, Hassan Piker. Yeah.
Makes all kinds of very violent pro-terrorist statements on his Twitch channel to 13-year-olds all the time.
Well, so I think this is the line, and I agree with Elon on this. And by the way, I just want to, give the disclaimer that this is opinion now. But
Sure.
I think if something is legal to be said in a town square, if you could go, I'm in LA, if you could go walk down to the Santa Monica 3rd Street Promenade and get a bullhorn and you could say it without being arrested, then I think you're okay saying it on X. I don't think we don't want a situation like England has, where 10,000 people a year are being arrested for speech crimes. If people are directly calling for violence, of course, that's a different story. And,
and that's the other thing I want to point out as examples, though, is a lot of the recent high-profile shootings in my backyard over here in the Pawtucket area were by people who had made overtly politicized statements. And in the case of the Pawtucket rink shooter, that's the ice rink I used to play at, so it's a little personal to me. I could picture my son being there at a hockey game when that happened. It's awful. I don't actually think it's just, a lot of people are like, it's just a transgender thing. I don't think that, because this person had other things going on, that they had Nazi actual tattoos of SS, and they were big fans of this Nicholas Fuentes. And that to me strikes as more than just a trans issue. This was a person that was clearly mentally ill. Like, I'm not trying to diagnose somebody, but I mean, she, whatever, they tell me I'm not even allowed to talk about it because you can't use the right pronouns because they'll tell you it's wrong every time. But this person comes into my ice rink, shoots up his own family, as I understand, and he did make politicized statements, but I don't necessarily think it's because his actions were as political as I think that somebody who's already in a state such as that, suffering from delusions, schizophrenia, anything, and drug addictions of certain kinds, prone to psychosis, hearing all of this openly violent propaganda, some of which is blatantly illegal, posted all over major platforms like Twitch, major platforms like X, major platforms like YouTube, very commonly seen by children. Hassan, this Asmongold on Twitch says similar things sometimes. These guys frequently see hundreds of thousands of live viewers.
I mean, I think it's, look, I don't know what these statements are and what these direct calls to violence are.
I won't ask you to comment on specific statements. I'm
I would say,
generally categorizing them as some of them have been extremely violent or adjacent to terrorist propaganda.
Right. And then, okay, so if that breaks the law, then someone needs to step in. But I would just say it can be a slippery slope. You remember, Tipper Gore's hearings where, there was this just hysteria in the very early 90s that rock music that, Ozzy Osbourne was causing kids to get violent.
I'm not calling to go crazy over it either.
No, I understand. I'm just saying
we need to pay more attention to violent rhetoric, because a lot of cases of these people that do engage
but
in
it has to cross
shootings,
a line. But it has
though
to cross
that they're
a line.
not particularly common, as we've kind of pointed out. Mass shootings aren't as common as people would like to believe because the media told them to. When they do happen, and the ideology is often being referenced as these fringe internet ideologies, and the people had prior been making violent rhetoric, all I'm saying is we as a society should ask, A, why is this happening? Right? And B, what can we do to intervene before it gets to violence?
So let me
I'm not
give you
asking to lock
let me
everybody
give you
up
a
for what
couple
they
more
say.
examples, Max. So on the side of the left, there was the shooter who was a big Bernie bro who went and shot up that Republican softball game,
Terrible.
right? Because he had been radicalized. On the right,
Charlottesville, that's easy, right?
sure. On the right, there's Charlottesville. I was thinking of something else, and it just slipped from my mind. But the point is that it becomes very dangerous. I think, unless there's an explicit call for violence when something happens, to then try to go back and blame it on music, a politician, a political movement, anything but that person. They're deranged people.
We tend
I
to
think
go
that when
more
you
towards that this is a mental health crisis being masked by politics.
Right.
right, but
Yeah.
I think once you get I think it becomes a very, very dangerous precedent once, under the guise of safety, politicians are now in the business of restricting speech because, well, Bernie Sanders and the DSA got this person all riled up, and look what he did. So they've got to tone down their rhetoric, or,
I
it's
very
a
much agree.
very,
I marched at the Boston Straight Pride Parade, which was a free speech thing. I'm a free speech guy. I'm not saying to lock anybody up for anything that is other than stuff that is already classed as illegal. I'm not saying new laws that are going to prohibit anybody's speech.
so how
What
about
I am
Hassan
saying is
Piker? What has
the
he
guy
said?
in
Because I don't know.
Pawtucket specifically made violent threats beforehand.
Well, then,
And
yeah,
nobody
of
looked
course.
into it. And this is a common theme I keep seeing. Same with the Providence, the Brown University shooting, another place that I'm familiar with, right? It's bothersome to know that there was so many threats by the perpetrators in both cases that were not taken seriously because people were afraid of exactly what you're saying, right? That
Right.
they would
No,
go too far just to ask some questions to a person that is making violent threats.
yeah, I want to make sure we're not conflating two things. When someone seems like they are spinning out of control and descending into some sort of madness, obviously, friends, neighbors, school counselors need to step in and try to see if they can prevent something. I think my only point is it is dangerous after the fact when you find out, oh, this person listened to death metal records, or this person was, a fan of this
I was
political
pen pals
movement or
with
that,
Jeffrey
then it's
Nichols,
dangerous.
so I feel you for real. Like I'm
Yeah.
on that side. I am.
Right. So yeah. So I think it's it's always it's a fine line, and a lot of times people will use these examples as a way to try to silence certain people that they don't want to hear from.
I just see
Yeah.
a lot of people slipping through the system, and it worries me and concerns me, And I
Sure.
think that in a lot of cases, it's kind of like your omission. The omission thing is the omission seems to be here's this person's politics, but the omission is here is a person that was clearly in need of crisis for a long time, and here's all the red flags. But we look more at the politics because it catches headlines, right? Especially for the journos. That's an easy headline. Such and such shooter left a manifesto, right?
Well, it depends which side it's coming from, right? If it's coming from another side, it won't be. It won't.
Yeah, then there's no
Yeah.
manifesto and we never heard of it, right?
Let me, I guess, and I don't know if you have you might not even have an answer for this. I know that this is a really, tough topic. But, you mentioned that you'd like mainstream, media to, you know, have more integrity. I am curious though for people, like I am a commentator. We're commentators, but we do, try and do, journalistic things on occasion. And the thing that's very kind of frustrating to me as for someone who kind of wanted to, do journalism too, like the barrier to entry, like you mentioned very early on, like a lot of the journalists and a lot of the commentators like Walter Cronkite, they were initially blue collar guys who didn't even go to college, and now the label of of journalism, and you hear the jokes about journalism degrees being useless and whatnot. So I guess, how do you think, media can, I guess, at least mainstream media, be, I guess, restored or reformed for the better? Or what would you like to see if you could wave a magic wand?
I mean, first of all, I think it's in their interest to do it. Outside of Fox News Channel and MS Now, who are doing just fine, and they're making a lot of money, they're not going to change, and nor should they. It's a free market, right? They found their niche, but the legacy networks, other cable news broadcasters are suffering. Newspapers in big cities are dying. Washington Post just had huge layoffs, and I think that there's an old expression in news, which is journalists should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And these kinds of like big blue news enterprises are just trying to comfort the comfortable. It is confirmation bias, giving people who are very comfortable exactly what they already believe, very rarely challenging them. I saw a New York Times headline. I actually just sent it to a friend. This was an article a few months ago, which was shocking, which was about an investigative piece in the New York Times about how Mississippi had gone from worst to first in education and what blue cities could learn from that. Not the kind of reporting you see a lot from them, right? Normally they would just omit it, right? It would be a crime of omission. So how could newspapers change? Newspapers, and how could mainstream media change? It could change by, first of all, I think, diversifying the workforce, which will take a long time, which means getting people from different walks of life, right? I mean, you will be hard pressed to go into a big city newsroom and find someone who goes to church.
Can I ask the elephant question then? Do you think AI is going to fill that void?
I hope not. I'm not.
I hope not too.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
it seems to be cheap and pretty
yes, it is.
efficient at trying to keep as little bias as whatever's built into the bot, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you'll see newspapers using more and more AI written stories. But look, I think it needs to be a culture that allows for people from different walks of life and different backgrounds and different political beliefs and different interests to have a openly spirited morning meeting where people can come up with all kinds of ideas, the kind of things that, when you have 100 people who are all in Brooklyn and, all are, see their job as resistance to the current administration, you're just not going to get that kind of mixed diversity of thought. So that's one big thing. And then I think
Steve would be with the clients, the family, and talking to them. And then there would be the screen with Amy there, and Amy would be in a different part of the house. Why
those
did
were
you start doing that?
COVID protocols. Amy was like just really concerned. She had some pre-existing conditions. Wow. And so for her to come back, she just wanted to be in a separate spot. And that was, we didn't want to say COVID because, who wanted years from now when people are watching it would make sense. So we kind of just gave this vague, like, she wanted to be in her own space so she could focus, but it was COVID.
So did COVID create a lot of challenges for filming? I mean, it
was such a pain in the ass. So I had two shows going. Reasonable Doubt was also going. And, none of it made any sense, but you would, we'd have production assistants who would be local. So let's say we were shooting in Providence, and then our PA might come in the next day and say, my roommate just got COVID. So now we have to shut everything down. We test everyone. And one thing I realized over, 2.5 years of these protocols is that the tests usually were delayed a day or two. So all of it was meaningless. So then we would shut it down for a day. The next morning, everyone would test. They'd be fine. But it didn't really mean that they didn't have COVID, because usually it would show up on a test maybe 2-3 days later. So anyway, yeah, it was a pain. It was a lot of kabuki theater.
It's changed travel for the worse in general too. A lot of like musicians I know were having a hell of a time getting started back up touring and getting in the groove of things again, especially independent guys, like a lot of in the scuffle of them not touring. Because if you're not a major artist, you weren't about to deal with the cost and hassle and insurance increases and everything of COVID. You just took a year or two off and made more records. And then you try to get back out on tour, and it's like, well, hey, Billy the road guy didn't show up. We don't know where he is, and you have to rebuild the crew from scratch. And there's all different ways of doing ticketing now with the whole Ticketmaster. But that's one thing. You know what I think journalists should talk about just a tad bit more is the Ticketmaster fucking monopoly. Sorry, it's maybe an alleged monopoly by me. I hate that so much, man. They've consolidated live entertainment and the ticket.
I think Eddie Vedder took that cause up.
Company.
Well, Eddie Vedder took that cause up years ago, right? So
I guess that's kind of.
And it drives every indie venue out of business within the next 10 years if it doesn't change.
Yeah, well, and so I guess, I want to be mindful of your time if we need to wrap up or anything. But
I did want to ask. Top of the hour, I'll be good.
Ask too. Do you think COVID and that period of time, when lots of people are just glued to the screens, do you think that changed media as well? Because like I definitely noticed, like I've always paid attention to the news because I'm a bit of a news junkie, but at the same time, like I can turn it off and whatnot. But a lot of people in my personal life, because of the lockdowns and whatnot, they just started to doom scroll and watch the quote unquote news channels 24/7.
I mean, I think that COVID also cost the mainstream media a lot of trust from the public, because I think one of the key things, and again, they're not supposed to take a side, but one of the key things is to call truth to power. So here in California, 3 days into the lockdowns, I could go down to the local Target and shop, and it never closed. But a lot of people had to sacrifice their businesses in the name of public health. Where was the media asking tough questions? Why are big corporations that make big donations allowed to stay open? COVID apparently isn't traveling in Targets or Walmarts, but it is in mom and pop stores, or Ralph's.
And in the music scene, this means big, famous, known bands got all those PPP loans, and independent venues went, good night.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of fraud with PPP loans, which that didn't really get a lot of coverage. Questions about whether the lockdowns themselves, and again, it's not that they're supposed to take a stance, but make politicians answer their decisions. When it became clear within a few weeks that most of the victims were either people who had a pre-existing condition or were over 75, did targeted lockdowns make more sense? Nobody wanted to ask these questions. So what we had was almost this like surreal, like state-run television that was basically giving kind of the unquestioned news from the perspective of the institutions, as opposed to it being an independent fourth estate that it was really like trying to hold truth to power and make them answer tough questions. Why were kids kept out of school in California for a second year when in Europe kids were back in school within months? Ask the questions. That's their job.
And the big thing for me was I'm up here in upstate New York. My issue was Governor Cuomo literally shoving COVID patients into nursing homes and killing everybody.
Especially with the two co-hosts here that are both disabled. It was a rough topic for them to talk about. People getting all up in like business about whether you're going to take the vaccine or not. Like one of the stories that I tried to bring attention to on this show last year was Ice Cube getting outed his status of being hesitant to take the vaccine when there was a person in his direct family history who was a victim of the Tuskegee experiments.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he didn't want to take the vaccine, because he was a black man in America who's been very politically vocal, Ice Cube, in a lot of ways, right? Who is now being told the states, you have to take it. And in some cases, they're saying you have to take it first because we want to give it to the black males first. And he's like, they said that to my great uncle and they gave him syphilis.
So you go back to the vaccines. And again, I'm just commenting on the way it was covered. So you have
Right.
I think by like April, May, it was kind of widely available, and basically there was a huge amount of pressure, and there were federal laws. If you were in a company with more than 100 people, you had to take it. Um, I remember if I wanted to go back out on the road with the shows, I had to take it. And so really there was a ton of pressure, but now nobody was asking tough questions. In fact, when it became clear that there were all these breakthrough cases, right? And you had the president and you had Fauci saying, if you get this, you can get your normal life back. You will not get it. You will not spread it. You have to hold truth to power. You have to ask questions. Okay, it doesn't seem like it's working the way it did. And then the CDC ultimately would come out and say that getting the vaccine made you no more likely to get it, less likely to get it, and no less likely to pass it on.
And there's
So
a
if
level
that's
of
the-
the treatment
so-
of Fauci in a specific way, as if.
But if
he
I could
were
just
the
close the loop
arbiter.
on this. So it
Sorry.
really became a therapeutic. That needed to be reported, right? So there's really that now the mask is off, there, pun intended. There is absolutely no, at this point, there's really no societal reason why people should have mandated vaccines. It's simply a personal decision because you're just as likely to get it or pass it along. And later studies would show that people who had multiple boosters were actually more likely to get COVID than those who hadn't. And so these are things that just need to be reported. You can't do journalism when you have an end destination in mind. If your goal is to prevent vaccine hesitancy, you're not a journalist, you're now an advocate, right? So you have to put it all out there.
Right. And what I meant with the Ice Cube thing is that it was journalists, I guess you could call it that, from TMZ that outed this man for not taking the vaccine, which was a private matter he didn't bring to the public's attention. He hadn't made any comment, Ice Cube, about it, and he felt particularly violated by that. That's the kind of like really toxic journalism that we need less of. That's a medical matter for that, man. They said it's, oh, well, he didn't take a certain role because he wouldn't take the vaccine, but nobody had announced that. That was just like they announced a rumor as a fact. And in essence, they gave out his medical information. That's for no reason at all, just because they didn't like his decision.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that one, and to be honest, I'll recuse myself on that one because I know a lot of people over there, so I can't be objective.
I'm not sure who specifically started it, to be fair. I would say more like it was tabloid type journalists rather than specifically TMZ. I do apologize in that regard because I'm not sure it was them, and I don't want to be a dirt.
I mean, look, the question is, how different would the decision making have been if they knew they had to answer tough questions? That's all. The media was reporting wasn't dismissing the Wuhan lab leak theory as the work of kooks and people in tinfoil hats, wasn't jumping on board the bandwagon of masks without, presenting all the facts that conflict in many different ways. Florida was presented as this death cult. And then, after the fact, it turned out that their results were pretty good. And it behooved media and mainstream journalists to report that and maybe to do some investigative pieces to question whether all of these... Look, how many people know that Johns Hopkins, not exactly a right-wing hotbed of thought, put together a pretty long study on the effectiveness of lockdowns and said they should never be done again, that it actually, on the net, killed more people than it saved? That's big news.
I had
a thing that makes me hopeful, by the way, to see stuff like that.
But it's not reported. Most people don't know it.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because that was actually one of the studies that I actually did cite at one point, and then actually that was like shortly before I got banned off YouTube that came out, and I was flagged for medical misinformation for simply bringing that up. So I found that to be very interesting, to say the least. So
how about this? There were people we found out in the lawsuit that from the Biden administration were pressuring Twitter to shadow ban people who were doing nothing more than reposting the CDC's own statistics
Yep.
saying that it created vaccine hesitancy. Now, I'm using the word Orwellian too much, but that's Orwellian, right? So the government is asking someone to ban someone for reposting the statistics that they themselves put out. You know,
Sometimes it feels like maybe not enough though, because people seem to just trust Big Brother quite a bit, and as long as it puts the costume on they like the best.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap things up, I mean, your book is pretty in depth. I guess, have you learned anything, I guess, new, transitioning from, your role as a producer and, doing that type of journalism to now being an author and writing nonfiction? What has that been like for you?
I mean, I think in some ways you're stretching the same muscle. I love research, so I'm the kind of person that will like just do a deep dive, right? I'll be talking to a friend. It could be about baseball, and it's like, is whip important? How important a predictor is whip when you're looking at like a pitcher? And now I'm just like doing a deep dive to just try to see, is the premise true? And so the research part of it was great. I spent a lot of time interviewing a lot of really interesting people, some friends, some people I was meeting for the first time who wanted to participate in this. I was really intrigued as I learned more, going through public records, case files, transcripts from trials, to really see what happened in these cases, because there was a ton I didn't know. Especially like the Michael Brown case in Ferguson is so different from the way it was reported. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was really fascinating. I mean, I guess the part that took an adjustment was, the part where you're just writing. And now you're alone. I'm used to the energy of a set, and you got a lot of people, and they're adjusting to quiet time was probably the hardest part, but I enjoyed it.
I would imagine so. Do you think that this is going to be a format that you continue on for future projects, or is it too early to say at this point?
Too early, even though I do have an idea for like a second Crimes of Omission, because through a different topic, that I think could be interesting. But I guess it depends.
Yeah.
How many books are sold here? So I'll have a better assessment in 6 months.
Yeah, I certainly understand how that goes.
That's pretty much the truth, yeah.
Being an indie author myself, and that that's always what matters. So anyway, well, Sarah, I really appreciate your time. Where can people find this book, and where can people find you?
Okay, so this book you can find anywhere. I actually was lucky. I did have it published through Post Hill Press, which is a division of Simon and Schuster. Anywhere you get books, Target, Barnes and Nobles, Amazon. Please pre-order now. It helps.
Sick. Our audience prefers physical copies by a long shot.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's going to be out, a paperback. So please send it out. Please put it in your basket, or send out or get the pre-order. It's going to come out on June 2nd. To find me, I am on X. And hold on, I'm going to find my own handle while I am talking to you.
Rob Rosen 14.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. You did my homework for me. So Rob Rosen 14. I'm on X. You can also check out my bio, links to the book, links to some of the shows I did at rprmedia.net. RPR, like Robert Patrick Rosen, media.net.
Rob, I really appreciate you having you on tonight. I apologize for some of the technical glitches
Not at all.
we had on, but I'll be sure to string this podcast together. Hopefully by the time people watch this, the entire episode will be edited together. So for the folks watching and listening, I'll have all of Rob's links in the description. Really appreciate your time tonight, sir, and would love to have you back on if you have anything else that you need to promote in the future. So
sounds good. I enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
All right, real appreciate it. And folks, we really appreciate you, tuning in. I will be back on Monday with a, guest for, the author, for the Monday edition as well. So I'll be there. And then next week we'll be back for the live show. And as always with the, news cycle, it's always anybody's guess what we'll be covering. So really appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. Again, thanks for coming on, Rob. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.